In the late summer of 1914, the commanders of the Russian and Austro-Hungarian empires looked at the Eastern Front and saw a blank canvas. They envisioned a swift, clinical war, defined by sweeping cavalry charges and brilliant open-field maneuvers. The focal point for both empires was the Lublin region, a stretch of borderland in modern-day Poland. Geography made it a natural springboard. If Russia held it, they could plunge straight south into the Austrian heartland of Galicia. If Austria captured it, they could drive north into the Russian-held Kingdom of Poland. The Austrians struck first. General Victor Denkel's First Army pushed aggressively north toward Lublin, securing early ground. In response, the Russian Fifth Army attempted to trap them, marching hard to wrap around the exposed eastern edge of Denkel's forces. But the Russians misjudged the Austrian strength. General Moritz Offenberg's Fourth Army slammed into the moving Russian columns. Offenberg executed a counter-encirclement, scattering the Russian Fifth Army at the Battle of Kraśnik. For the Austrians, Kraśnik was a textbook victory. It was exactly the kind of battle the military academies had promised. It validated the belief that modern, industrialized armies could still outflank and outmaneuver their enemies in the open field. But moving hundreds of thousands of men across a map is very different from marching them through the physical reality of the borderlands. The late August heat was suffocating. Infantry columns slogged through deep sand, choking on dust, while massive horse-drawn supply trains caused miles-long traffic jams. The extreme exhaustion quickly eroded discipline and nerves. During a night march south of Zykov, the disoriented men of the Austrian 24th Regiment heard rustling in the dark and opened fire on their own troops, leaving 40 dead and wounded before the sun even rose. That confusion compounded when the fighting reached Zamość and the nearby village of Konti. The open farmlands gave way to dense, dark pine forests, blinding the commanders and shattering any hope of coordinated movement. Here, the era's military doctrine collided with geography. The commanders were trained to concentrate massive numbers of troops to break enemy lines, and they blindly applied that same tactic to the dense woods. Entire Austrian battalions were squeezed into attack sectors just 300 meters wide. That meant stuffing roughly 1,000 men into a sliver of dense timber, standing shoulder to shoulder as they tried to push through the underbrush. Trapped in the trees, these tightly packed formations were completely exposed to incoming artillery. High explosive shells turned the pine trees into lethal wooden shrapnel. When the lines finally met, the combat devolved into brutal, disorganized bayonet fighting in the shadows. The forests around Zamość slowed the Austrian momentum to a crawl. Their tactical coherence evaporated, and under heavy Russian pressure, the offensive stalled. The surviving Austrian forces were forced into a grinding retreat back to the south. By the first week of September, the retreating Austrians reached a defensive limit. Just south of Bakava, they abandoned mobile tactics and dug 3 deep lines of trenches into the earth, reinforcing their positions with steel sniper shields. The pursuing Russian 16th Corps prepared an assault on these new Austrian positions. They focused their strike on a steady, completely exposed incline known as Biała Góra, or White Mountain. On September 6th, the Russians charged up the open slope. The massed infantry, advancing in traditional lines, was systematically dismantled by the interlocking fire of hidden machine guns and a coordinated artillery barrage. The assault failed to reach the crest. The Russian survivors couldn't advance, and retreating meant exposing themselves to further fire. They spent the night pinned down in abandoned muddy ditches on the side of the hill. Behind the lines, the sheer volume of casualties overwhelmed the medical logistics. The regiment hospitals ran out of doctors and supplies, leaving wounded men to bleed into the dirt while waiting for relief that never arrived. By the end of these first few weeks, the terrain and technology of the Lublin region had dictated the terms of the conflict. While the early success at Kraśnik suggested a war of rapid movement, the fighting at Bakava showed that modern fire could halt an offensive in its tracks, turning the campaign into a static struggle for survival.